It happened on a night when television felt less like entertainment and more like trial by fire. The stage lights beamed down with surgical intensity. The cameras hummed, and the studio audience buzzed with that restless energy only late-night television can generate. People came expecting comedy, satire, and clever banter. What they got instead was a showdown that felt like gladiators in the Colosseum. Conan O'Brien, towering, lanky, and famously quick-witted, had invited Stephen Colbert as his guest. At first glance, it looked like a reunion of two comedy titans, a friendly exchange between men who had shaped the very DNA of American late-night television. But beneath the smiles and handshakes, there was tension, palpable, unspoken, and waiting to ignite. And ignite it did. Within the first 5 minutes of the segment, the crowd knew something unusual was brewing. Colbert wasn't sitting in the chair as a guest content to be charming. No, he was perched, coiled, eyes flashing with that mischievous glint he gets when he knows he's about to spring a trap. The trap came in the form of a single, perfectly timed line. Conan asked Colbert about the state of late night and how it felt competing with streaming platforms, billion-dollar corporations, and digital comedians flooding YouTube. A softball question, really. The kind that invites an anecdote or a laugh. But Colbert leaned forward, adjusted his tie, and dropped it. Funny you ask, Conan, because some of us are still thriving in the fight, while others are just surviving. The audience chuckled nervously. Conan froze. His trademark smirk faltered just a little. And in that instant, the night transformed. What Colbert had done was more than a jab. It was an ambush. He had reframed the conversation, turned the camera's gaze, and put Conan in the defendant's chair without warning. The laughter that rippled through the audience wasn't easy. It had an edge to it. People leaned forward, sensing that the pleasantries were over. As a narrator in this unfolding drama, let me tell you, the stakes were suddenly monumental. This wasn't just a clash of egos. It was about credibility, about legacy, about who owns the throne of late night in an era when money, influence, and technology are rewriting the rules of entertainment. Because here's the truth. The late night arena isn't just about comedy anymore. It's about billions in advertising revenue. It's about political power disguised as satire. It's about who controls the narrative in America after dark. And Colbert, always sharp, always strategic, had come armed with receipts. Conan O'Brien, the veteran, the giant with decades of battles behind him, known for self-deprecating humor, physical comedy, and razor-sharp improvisation, but also in recent years known for bouncing networks, losing time slots, and fighting uphill battles to stay in the conversation. Stephen Colbert, the tactician. He entered late night armed with political satire, trained in the fires of the Colbert Report. He's not just a comedian. He's a strategist who knows how to turn laughter into influence. And tonight, he wasn't smiling to make friends. He was smiling like a prosecutor sharpening his knife. The audience, not just spectators. They were the live jury, reacting in real time, gasping, laughing, applauding, sometimes uncomfortably. Their reactions would fuel the momentum, deciding which gladiator stood taller and which stumbled. Surviving, Conan repeated, attempting to laugh it off. I think I'm doing okay, Stephen. I've been on air longer than most politicians have been in office. But Colbert didn't back down. He tilted his head, looked around theatrically, and delivered the next blow. Longevity doesn't always mean dominance, Conan. There are people who've been in Congress for decades too. Doesn't mean they're winning. The crowd erupted. Some clapped, some gasped, and Conan leaned back, blinking. In the span of 30 seconds, Colbert had reframed him as a relic, respected but outdated. And Conan knew it. Here's the loop you need to hold on to. This wasn't just playful banter anymore. Colbert had come with an agenda, and humiliation was only the beginning. To understand why this clash resonated, you need context. The late-night battlefield has been bleeding relevance. With streaming empires pouring billions into content, with TikTok and YouTube siphoning younger audiences, traditional late-night shows have been losing their grip. Ratings have dropped. Advertising money has shifted. What used to be the most powerful voice in entertainment, the voice that mocked presidents, shaped narratives, and decided what America laughed at, was under siege. And among the old guard, Conan was often cited as the wandering king without a throne. He had migrated from NBC to TBS, then to digital platforms, constantly reinventing himself but never securing the empire he once dreamed of. Colbert, on the other hand, had cemented his place on CBS, wielding his show as both comedy and political weaponry. So when Colbert ambushed Conan, he wasn't just making a joke. He was planting a flag, declaring dominance. And he was doing it live, with millions watching. Stephen, Conan tried again, this time with a tighter smile. You've always had a way of, well, being a little smug. The crowd chuckled. Conan was trying to flip the frame back, to remind the audience of Colbert's reputation for smug satire. But Colbert only leaned further in. Smug Conan? Or prepared? Because there's a difference. See, some of us read the room, the politics, the industry, and some of us just tell jokes and hope people still care. The words landed like a hammer. The audience reacted with a mix of laughter and audible oaths. Conan blinked again, his fingers tightening on his mug. And here's the key moment. You could feel Conan slipping. His rhythm, the thing that makes him dangerous in comedy, was off. Colbert had disrupted his timing, and in comedy, timing is everything. What happened next would cement the night as one of the most brutal on-air humiliations in late-night history. But before we get there, remember this. Conan isn't a pushover. He's been underestimated before. And a wounded comedian with nothing to lose is often the most dangerous kind of opponent. So the question lingered, hanging heavy in the studio. Would Conan recover, or would Colbert finish what he started? The room was buzzing now, an electric tension that only live television can create. Viewers at home leaned forward, phones in hand, ready to clip the next 5 seconds if something shocking dropped. Conan O'Brien, who had mastered decades of monologues, suddenly found himself cornered on his own stage. And Colbert knew it. Conan tried again, his tall frame leaning casually, his tone light. Well, Stephen, I may not have your nightly crusade against Washington, but last I checked, people still tune in to laugh at my dumb hair and my awkward dancing. The crowd chuckled, relieved for a moment. Conan had found footing, playing into his brand of self-deprecation. But Colbert didn't let the moment breathe. Sure, Colbert said smoothly, but are they laughing with you or just at you? The silence was instant. The joke wasn't lighthearted. It was surgical. The studio audience gasped, then burst into laughter, not because it was funny, but because it was brutal. It was the kind of laughter that made everyone glance at Conan to see if he'd crack. It's worth noting, in late-night television, the audience isn't passive. They're a live feedback loop. Every gasp, every roar, every uncomfortable silence is amplified on screen. And tonight, the audience wasn't on Conan's side. They were reacting to Colbert's dominance. One woman in the front row audibly whispered, "Oh my God!" Another clapped her hands like she'd just witnessed a knockout punch. The energy tilted further away from Conan, and every second of hesitation made him look weaker. As the narrator of this moment, I'll say it plainly, Conan was fighting gravity. Every time he tried to climb back up, Colbert pulled him down with another perfectly placed jab. Colbert's strategy wasn't random. He had come with a plan. For weeks, headlines had circulated about Conan's streaming deals, his shrinking late-night footprint, and the end of the old guard. Colbert weaponized those headlines like a lawyer bringing evidence into trial. He leaned in again. You know, Conan, I read that Forbes piece about the money flooding into streaming. Netflix, Hulu, even YouTube throwing billions around. The future's crowded. And then I thought, where does Conan fit into that future? Gasps, murmurs, another ripple of applause. Conan forced a smile, but his eyes betrayed him. This wasn't banter anymore. It was cross-examination. Still, never underestimate a veteran. Conan straightened, let the pause hang, and then fired back. Where do I fit, Stephen? Well, unlike some people, I don't need to turn my monologue into a campaign rally every night. I tell jokes, not sermons. Boom! The audience erupted. Conan had landed one. The crowd roared, applauded. Some even stood. For the first time in the exchange, the balance shifted. Colbert's smirk twitched, just barely. He adjusted his posture. The trap was still set, but Conan had reminded everyone he wasn't defenseless. But Colbert wasn't rattled. In fact, he smiled wider, like a chess player who had just anticipated a counter. Jokes are fine, Conan. But when the house is on fire, some of us grab a hose. Some of us keep dancing. Another eruption. Colbert had twisted Conan's counter into a metaphor that framed him as irrelevant, even irresponsible. The gasps this time weren't just in the front row. They echoed across the studio. And then, like a hammer blow, Colbert delivered the line that would trend for days. America doesn't need another clown in the corner. It needs someone willing to stand in the spotlight and call out the circus. The audience lost it. Standing ovation from half the crowd. Cheers, whistles. A roar that drowned out Conan's nervous laugh. At this stage, the humiliation was layered. Conan wasn't just losing banter. He was losing narrative control. The way Colbert positioned himself as a truth-teller in a corrupt system, as a comedian who mattered, resonated in a world where politics and entertainment were inseparable. And here's the painful truth. In a society fueled by finance, power, and media empires, the audience often crowns a figure who appears stronger, sharper, more relevant. Colbert had seized that crown in real time. "You know, Stephen," Conan said finally, lifting his mug again, "I invited you here to promote your book, not to stage a coup." The crowd laughed. Conan's delivery was sharp, but the undertone was clear. He felt ambushed, cornered, maybe even betrayed. Colbert, with perfect comedic cruelty, replied, "Promotion's easy, Conan. Revolution's harder." Another explosion of laughter and applause. Late-night feuds aren't new. Hosts poke, prod, even insult one another on air all the time. But what made this moment different was the balance of power. Normally, Conan thrives on awkwardness. He twists silences into laughs, exaggerates his gangly frame, uses self-mockery to win the crowd. But Colbert didn't let him. Every silence became evidence. Every hesitation became weakness. And the humiliation wasn't just comedic. It was symbolic. One represented the past, the other the present. One survived by adapting, the other thrived by dominating. That symbolism is what would make the headline scream the next morning. Colbert ambushes Conan, humiliation on his own stage. But the night wasn't over. Because Conan wasn't finished yet. Behind the strained smile, behind the nervous laugh, there was still a spark. The spark of a man who had weathered corporate betrayals, time slot wars, firings, and more. A man who had walked away from NBC with nothing and rebuilt himself from scratch. And the question that loomed over the next act was this. Would Conan let this humiliation define him, or would he claw back one final victory before the night was through? The roar in the studio didn't end when the band hit its sting. It stretched, curled around the rafters, and leaked into every phone in the audience like steam from a busted pipe. You could feel it. Half the crowd came for comedy and stumbled into a courtroom. The charge? Relevance. The penalties? Pride, ratings, leverage, and money. Always money. I watched a young producer at the edge of the curtain tap a tablet like a drummer. Clip, time code, upload, caption. A social editor whispered to a camera op, "Get me the cut where Colbert says clown in the corner." That's the one. It only took 60 seconds. A minute after the line landed, the studio was already trending with a headline the internet wrote in unison. Colbert ambushes Conan. Live. The algorithm didn't wait for context. It rarely does. In the seats, phones glowed like constellations. A guy in row G turned his screen to a friend. Already a 15-second clip with 1 million views attached to an all-caps caption. A woman behind him typed furiously, threading a post like a stenographer. Colbert went prosecutor. Conan tried self-deprecating. Crowd sided with blood. The stage looked the same. Same desk, same mug, same red on-air sign. But the air had a taste of metal. Conan's shoulders were squared. His smile lacquered on. Colbert sat with the stillness of a chess player who knows the clock favors him. The band, sensing a shift, hit softer notes. In late night, even music knows when to be quiet. Then the monitors in the wings flashed. 5 million, 7.2, 10.9 Live impressions across platforms. Advertisers like sharks scenting blood circled the numbers. The studio had become a trading floor. Reputation, price to the second. By the next commercial break, the spin had begun. A rival show's booker posted a subtweet. Some legends keep it classy, others just grandstand. A podcaster went live from a kitchen table pile with branded mugs and ambition. Is this the night late night finally picked a side, comedy or crusade? A media column is filed early. Colbert weaponizes morality. Conan tries to tax it with charm. But here's what the spreadsheet crowd noticed first. CPM spikes. Money chases heat, and this stage was on fire. A streaming platform scheduler slid a message to a talent agent. If your guy has a segment tomorrow, we'll front page it. Meanwhile, a legacy network pinged another agent. We're not paying post-fracas hazard rates. That's how fast drama turns into line items. And the audience back home? They didn't care about the ledgers. They wanted a moral. They wanted a winner. They wanted to witness a line you could tell your friends you heard live. The next morning, the usual roundtable shows carve the night like surgeons with different philosophies. One panelist, the cynic, said, "It's all theater. They both win. One gets clicks. The other gets sympathy." A second, the purist, replied, "Sympathy doesn't move the needle. Authority does." Colbert asserted authority. A third, the skeptic, added, "Authority without warm curdles." Did he risk looking cruel? Clips rolled. Conan's laugh, half genuine, half defense mechanism. Colbert's line, crisp as glass. America doesn't need another clown in the corner. Freeze frame. Zoom. Debates broke out over eyebrows, pauses, and lip twitches. The microforensics of televised combat. And yet, under all the commentary, a drumbeat. Who owns the night now? By noon, the internet had drawn its chalk lines. Team Conan rallied around resilience. They posted montages. The Harvard Lampoon, The Simpsons years, The Tonight Show turbulence, the reinvention on cable, the podcasts, the remote shoots with small crews and big laughs. They wrote, "He survives, adapts, and always finds a way." Team Colbert emphasized consequence. They compiled monologues that threaded jokes with journalistic spine, moments where satire didn't just entertain, it indicted. They wrote, "He doesn't clown the circus, he calls it out." If you listen closely, both sides were arguing for a worldview, not just a late-night preference. Is a host a jester or a judge? A mood or a mission? The answer is worth real money and cultural power. That's why the noise was so loud. Back in the corridors, the place where legends look like people, producers issued quiet orders. One set of notes to Conan's team. Tighten the next segments, cut soft questions, script one sharp counter. One memo to Colbert's camp. Leak within an hour. Great TV, careful with tone. We win on wit, not superiority. Quietly, booking wars ignited. One publicist sent a blast. My client will do either show, but wants a fair conversation, not a firing squad. Translation, fear. Another asked for pre-interview assurances. Translation, control. And in a conference room, a network exec pulled up a slide, sentiment versus share. 2 lines on a graph, crossing like fates. We can weather sentiment, the exec said, if share keeps climbing. But if we lose both, no one finished the sentence. No one admits it outright. But here's the ledger that makes nights like this feel biblical. Ads, affiliates, platform placement, international syndication, clip licensing. Each one is a column. Each column needs a reason to believe your show matters. Moral clarity is a currency now. So is nostalgia. So is danger, the sense that anything could happen when you're live. Colbert's ambush bought danger and moral clarity in one cashback swipe. Conan's grace under pressure bought nostalgia and humanity. Both spend well, but only one can set the agenda tomorrow. Investors don't ask, who's the funniest? They ask, who owns the conversation? And on that scoreboard, last night wasn't subtle. That afternoon, a montage resurfaced. Conan comforting a nervous young comic after a shaky set. Conan clowning with a travel crew in a far-off market. Conan letting a band play too long because they were having the night. People wrote, "This is why I love him." Others responded with Colbert at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, that long ago night when satire threw a brick through the window and dared the room to clap. This is why we need him. 2 clips, 2 moral compasses, 1 argument. What is late night for? By the evening cycle, Conan found a second wind. He taped a short digital extra. Not the banter of a battered host, but the voice of a survivor who has learned to assert the undertow. "Look," he said, smiling with the steady amusement of a man who's met worse storms. "I invited Stephen because he's brilliant. He brought heat. That's good TV. But I don't need a crusade to make people laugh. I need a desk, a camera, and a band that still returns my calls." It was self-aware, unbothered, and mischievous enough to trend. The internet loves a man who refuses to bleed in public. The comments turned. King behavior. That's how you do it. He took the shot, smiled, kept walking. Sentiment ticked. Not a tidal wave, but enough to draw breath back into a chest that had been punched all morning. Colbert, for his part, posted a half-minute acknowledgement. Not an apology, not a victory lap. "We spar because we care," he said. "And I love Conan. He makes the room brighter." Last night, we turned up the dimmer to interrogation. It happens. Smart, strategic. It slowed the narrative that he'd gone too far, without softening the reality that he had commanded the room. A prosecutor who pats a defendant on the shoulder is still prosecutor. That night, the second wave of think pieces hit. Culture Weekly. The 2 souls of late night, pastoral versus prophetic. Add in money. CPM spike. Why brands secretly love a televised takedown. Screencraft. Timing as tactic. How Colbert broke Conan's rhythm. Comedy Forum. Don't confuse heat with humor. Why the laugh belongs to Conan. They were all right and all incomplete, because the truth was still breathing. The only thing that would settle was a final exchange on the next show, with both men aware the world was watching and counting. In the next taping block, just when the dust threatened to settle, the house lights dipped and the band cut mid-riff. Conan looked at the wings, eyebrows up. The crowd leaned forward. I did too. A stagehand rolled out a second, smaller desk, a visual joke by itself, and set at a diagonal Conan's like a tiny rival nation. The audience laughed. Then they cheered. Then they stood. Conan walked around his own desk, stretched his arms like a referee, and said, "Since we're now a courtroom, let's have 2 benches. I'll take the People's Court, the portable one." He sat at the tiny desk, knees nearly to his chin, and grinned like a kid. "Objection, Your Honor. Prosecution is addicted to metaphors." The room exploded. For the first time since the ambush, Conan owned a moment with his signature absurdity. Not evasion, not martyrdom, but a daring inversion. If you can't beat the frame, mock the frame. Bend it until the audience remembers you built the stage they're standing on. The camera cut to a surprise, a split feed. Colbert joining live for a quick satellite cameo. 2 benches, 2 faces, a fragile ceasefire made of comedy. "Overruled," Colbert intoned. On the grounds at the portable bench is adorable. Laughter, relief, a crack in the tension large enough to exhale through. Then Conan struck, not cruelly, not bitterly, but with scalpel precision dressed in silliness. "Stephen, if America doesn't need another clown in the corner, can I be the clown in the center?" He paused, let the audience ride the wave, and twisted it. Because the circus only works if someone's willing to juggle chaos. Applause thundered. Not pity. Admiration. Colbert nodded once. That nod meant, "Good. There you are." As that exchange ricocheted into feeds, dashboards updated. Sentiment for Conan climbed. Colbert's authority score, yes. There's a spreadsheet that calls it that. Held steady. The story had evolved. It wasn't humiliation anymore. It was dialectic. 2 crafts, 2 creeds, 1 stage. A brand manager slacked a team. "We want Conan's tiny bench bit on pre-roll." Feels joyful. A civic nonprofit DM'd Colbert's booker. "Panel on satire and truth? We can pay, and we'll put it in classrooms. Different currencies. Both spend." Comments shifted from Team X versus Team Y to something grittier and more interesting. Conan reminded me why I fell in love with late night. The play. Colbert reminded me why I started watching again. The purpose. What if the future is both? In the balcony, an older couple held hands. That felt like Carson and Cabot fighting inside one body. The man said. The woman nodded. It felt alive. Backstage, I passed a mirror where the word showdown had been scrawled on a whiteboard, then crossed out and replaced with duet. An assistant shook her head and wrote debate. Someone else drew 2 stick-figure desks. Stuff like that matters. It tells you what the people making the thing believe they're making. It tells you where the finale might go. And that's where we leave the middle. With 2 masters who sharpen each other, an audience that demanded both laughter and spine, and an industry that learned, again, that ratings chase risk, and risk is a currency you mint live. But there's one exchange left. One final volley, where someone has to put a period on a sentence written by millions of thumbs. Because in late night, it isn't enough to survive the hurricane. You have to walk out holding something true. When the dust of the middle act settled, one truth remained. The audience wasn't looking for just comedy anymore. They were hungry for a verdict. They wanted a final swing, a closing statement. Something they could etch into memory as the moment that defined the night. The stage was still lit in that icy glow that makes late night feel half circus, half courtroom. Conan leaned on his tiny desk, knees jutting, looking ridiculous yet somehow regal in his refusal to shrink. Colbert, piped into the split screen, looked sharper than ever, chin lifted, tie perfect, the glow of his own set giving him the aura of a man still in control. And then came the silence. A silence not of accident, but of design. You could hear the whir of cameras, the soft squeak of a chair. This was the setup for the final exchange. Conan spoke first. His voice wasn't timid, wasn't shaky. It was steady, measured. "Stephen," he said, "you're right about a lot of things. You're sharp. You fight with words like they're weapons. But here's the difference between us. I don't see this as a war. I see it as a conversation with the audience I've loved for decades. They've laughed with me, at me, sometimes despite me. And you know what? That's enough." The crowd applauded warmly. Not the roar of bloodlust, but the kind of applause that feels like recognition. Colbert tilted his head, smiled faintly, then answered, voice low, cutting through the applause like a scalpel. "And that's the difference, Conan. You see conversation. I see responsibility. The times we live in demand more than jokes. They demand someone to point at the fire and say, 'Look, it's burning.' And if you can make people laugh while you do it, maybe you can save them too." The audience gasped, then erupted again. 2 truths, delivered back to back, colliding like tectonic plates. The tension peaked. Conan grinned suddenly, that mischievous flash in his eye that had carried him through decades of absurdity. He stood up, leaving the tiny desk, and stretched his full, towering height. "You know what, Stephen? If you're the firefighter," he said, "then maybe I'm the circus clown. But here's the thing. People need the clown. Because after you shout about the fire, somebody has to remind them how to laugh while the alarms are still ringing." The crowd exploded. This time, the standing ovation was universal. People clapped until palms stung, whistled until throats rasped. And here's the kicker. Colbert applauded too. On split screen, he nodded, smiling not smugly but with genuine respect. "Fair," Colbert said. "Then let's agree. I'll fight the fire. You keep them laughing in the smoke." It wasn't defeat. It wasn't surrender. It was something rarer in the age of constant battles. Mutual recognition. In the balcony, people hugged. In the front rows, fans jumped to their feet, phones out, recording what felt like history. The hashtag started even before the credits rolled. Hashtag clown versus firefighter, hashtag late night showdown, hashtag Conan versus Colbert, hashtag respect not rivalry. The internet did what it always does. It spun the moment into memes, gifs, and battle cries. But this time, the tone wasn't pure humiliation. It was something messier, more human. A duel that ended not in knockout, but an acknowledgement that both fighters mattered. The next morning, every outlet had its headline. Colbert ambushes, Conan deflects, both walk away legends, a duel of comedy and conscience. Who really won? When late night stopped being late night and became something else entirely. The clips went viral. racking up tens of millions of views across TikTok, YouTube, Twitter. The clown in the center line trended for 48 hours straight. Advertisers leaned in. Panel shows milked the replay. Comedy writers broke down the timing like coaches analyzing game tape. But the most telling commentary came not from critics, but from ordinary viewers. Conan reminded me we need joy. Colbert reminded me we need courage. Maybe late night can be both. So who won? If you measure in jabs, Colbert had the upper hand. If you measure in recovery, Conan stole back dignity. If you measure in memory, the night belonged to both. The humiliation was real, yes. Colbert ambushed Conan, and for a long stretch of minutes, he held the upper hand with cutting precision. But humiliation doesn't last forever when a man has the wit and the absurdity to transform it into comedy, and Conan did exactly that. By the end of the night, the question wasn't who lost. It was, what do we want late night to be? A pulpit? A playground? A little of both? That's the loop the story leaves open, because the answer doesn't belong to Colbert or Conan. It belongs to the audience, to the culture, to the way we balance laughter with accountability. In the end, the image that lingers isn't Conan's silence and humiliation, or Colbert basking in triumph. It's Conan at that tiny desk, knees bent, grinning like a kid, cracking the frame wide open. It's Colbert, nodding with respect, acknowledging the opponent he just battered but couldn't erase. Two men, two styles. One night that reminded us why live television still matters. Because when the cameras roll and the lights blaze, anything can happen. And when anything can happen, we can still be shocked, humbled, entertained, and reminded that even in the circus, the fire, or the courtroom of comedy, we're watching not just for laughs, but for truth. So I'll leave you with this. In an age where satire doubles as journalism and laughter doubles as medicine, which voice do we need more? The clown in the corner or the firefighter with the hose? Maybe, just maybe we still need both.